Welcome to the History Makers Project. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Rita Richey. I'm from Wayne State in Detroit.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about your career path from where you started and how you got to Wayne State?
Okay. Well, I started off like many people, teaching school. I requested something. I requested middle school. They weren't called middle schools then, junior highs. And so I was 3 years in a junior high, a year in a high school, and at that point I'd gone into reading and was working with secondary reading work. And I then went to a local community college when they were building a new campus. And I went there, and they were looking for a secondary reading person, which was at that time pretty unusual. And so I was in charge of setting up what we then called a remedial program. That's not the acceptable language today. So I did that. When I finished my PhD, I went to Wayne State in 1971 and stayed there until I retired in 2008.
That's excellent.
So
wonderful. They were lucky to have you, I'm sure. What is the primary focus of your research?
Well, it was always instructional design, and especially design research and theory. And as you know, I've done some other work in terms of competency development. In fact, early on, I did that before the work at TIPPY that we were talking about. But it's always been research and theory and instructional design.
Well, please talk a little bit more about your work with
Okay.
Explicity. TIPPY stands for what?
Oh, it's the world's worst acronym. International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Instruction. Get an A because I remember what it stands for. When TIPPY started, it had membership specifically from people in the business community, large corporations usually, consultants, and then higher ed. And there were sort of official representatives from each of these areas. So I was asked to be a higher ed representative and was on the board for 10 years maybe, a long time. But the work on competency development then, and it had started early with some instructional design competencies that they developed in the 80s, and they were pretty out of date. And so the first thing I worked on was the new instructional design competencies. In fact, they're just coming out with a third set of design competencies. But I worked on that and with the board, and also it was really through TIPPY that I edited the book on Bob Gagne. But you know, the competency development process and all the research that went into it was a huge process. So putting the book together was just kind of the icing on the cake.
And you said that was a combination of American Society of Training and Development, ASTD, and National Society of Performance and Instruction, NSPI.
Yeah,
and,
although I think back then it was called Programmed Instruction. They've changed their names so many
several times.
Yes.
And then was there a third AECT? No. What was the third organization then?
Yeah, you'd come up with it. Now I can't remember.
Okay, well, ASTD, NSPI.
Oh, ASTD, NSPI, and AECT.
AECT
those
was the
three.
third. Okay.
Right.
Excellent.
So those were the original impetus for it. And of course, originally the think was, it was really exploring the idea of certification. And
was the whole thought of competencies new at that point, or some sectors were using it, others were not?
You know, not really. I mean, when the first work I ever did, you know, like a job where they paid me in higher ed, was in '71, and I was in charge of the development of an instructional system when they were designing competency-based teacher ed systems. And so it was really the teacher ed work that was some of the early forerunners of competency development. And we did was with a vocational education program at Wayne State. And it was really very interesting because, you know, what was new was criterion reference testing. And but we designed, and actually even writing objectives for classes was fairly new at that point. You know, people just had been doing that for a few years. And so the competency movement really came out of the teacher ed work that had been going on then.
It's fascinating. I don't know that too many people know that.
Well, yeah, it's probably lost because there's a fascinating piece of literature on that, you know, and of course with all of the discussion now about, you know, teacher effectiveness and all of this stuff that's in the paper, you know, I sort of laughed thinking back because we had, like, part of that program, well, part of it was not only writing objectives but writing test items for everything throughout the program, including student teaching. So there was all performance testing that went on in the field experiences in the pre-student teaching as well as the student teaching, and before, you know, I mean, it was, so people talk about things now, and I say, we did that 40 years ago.
If you don't know history, you're doomed to think you're reinventing
Right.
or inventing
Right.
things.
Right.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the book that you edited on Robert Gagne.
Oh, on Gagne. Well,
How did you know him? How did you get to know him? And
well, you
this
know,
all
I
occurred?
knew him sort of like everybody knew him. You know, I read his books because I'd not been a Florida State student, so I read his books and studied things and seen him at conferences, and so it just that it seemed to me that he was so pivotal in the field. I said, how come no one's ever done this? And it was sort of interesting because the book has a section with reprints of pieces that represent his major contributions, as well as people doing it, then following up with analysis parts about the impact on, you know, on learning, on military work, and on the different kinds of fields. So it was sort of interesting. He was still alive when that was done, and I sent him the outline. And because it's hard, you know, when someone's written a lot of books, I mean, you can't reprint a book, you know, so you need journal articles, really. And so I wanted to make sure the ones I picked out were the ones that he thought were really getting, you know, the real core of his contributions. Which he said, yeah, he says, you're right, those are all on. He added one, which was interesting, and I don't know if people are reading that a lot now. It was one of the last pieces that he did with Dave Merrill, and it was where they were really adding on another layer of learning in terms of, I mean, now it's probably what people would be calling complex learning, but so we added that piece in.
Tell me a little bit more about your work with instructional design and some of the things that influenced you, and then what you think you have actually contributed.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. Well, the original, how I got interested in instructional design was perhaps interesting, I don't know. I'd mentioned that I had started off working in reading, and my master's was in psychology of reading and working with Don Smith at the University of Michigan. Now, that was in the mid-'60s. Nobody had the term instructional design then, so I don't know, that sort of appeared somewhere in the 70s. But Don was, you know, if you go back to the mid-'60s, behaviorism was sort of the hot new thing on the block. And Don did what was called discrimination programming, a type of programmed instruction. And had, at the reading clinic there, they had devised really, we'd say now, a very systematic set of programmed materials for teaching basic skills. And they taught them to, low IQ children. They had adult programs, adult literacy programs. I mean, it was really very interesting. But, so in my work with him, what I really got interested in was, we'd say, instructional design, although no one said it, but you learned really task analysis, writing objectives, task analysis, writing programmed instruction and things like that. So I decided that I wanted to go on with that area. And if you were going to do it, I mean, probably, a lot of people started off with the degrees in Ed Psych. If I continued at Michigan, it would have been an Ed Psych degree, because they really still don't have I would say, a program in our area. But Don thought he was going to leave, and he took a leave for a year or two. And so I said, well, I'll wait and see. In the meantime, and that's about when I had started at this community college, and the instructional technology program at Wayne had, when they were devising an entirely new curriculum, had doctoral students out working with faculty designing their courses. And so I was assigned to someone, and we sat down, and he finally said, "You already know all this stuff, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he says, "Oh, well, then I'm not going to teach you." So, but we got to talking about the program, and I said, well, I was right on the verge of wanting to go into a doctoral program, and was kind of holding off at that point. So I talked to Jack Gordon, who really is out of the field now, but I almost gave up on the task, because he said, well, people that get doctorates in this field, if they're men, they go on to higher education, and if they're women, they stay in the public schools. I said, oh, sorry, I was thinking of doing higher ed, In fact, I was the first female. I mean, it was a very male program all over the country then. I was the first female that got a PhD in IT at Wayne.
That's exciting.
Well, it was. I mean, it was all men, and all white men.
And was that difficult? Was it?
Yeah, I didn't. No, not really. I guess I just didn't pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. But I was interested in design. Jack was, because of this, where I'd started with the reading work, and it was hard to find programs. There really weren't programs around that did that. I mean, that was programs were still moving out of the old audiovisual orientation. I remember when I said, well, if I get a degree in this field, do I have to learn how to thread a film projector? And they said no, and I said, okay, then I'll do it, because I'm not a techie. But what I was interested in doing was going into teacher education and designing instructional programs for teacher ed, which is a pretty narrow thing.
But important.
Well, I thought it was. Plus, I wasn't really mobile. I was married, and I mean, it was very fortunate that I ended up with a job doing exactly what I wanted to do. So I was really in teacher ed for 10 years, because I got this job at Wayne where I'd gotten my degree, which, but because I'd moved into teacher ed and was tenured originally in teacher ed, I sort of went in the back door and then moved back to IT.
Excellent. Well, can you share some of the major ideas and approaches and people that have stimulated your work and everything?
Well, I talked about Don Smith, who was an early person in terms of really learning about design. The other one that was really important was Leonard Silver, and which is a name that I imagine a lot of people don't don't know now. If you talk to Bob Hynek, ask him about Leonard Silver, because he was an old friend of his. But when I had started at work at this community college, which was a wonderful experience, and I knew at the time that was probably the only time in my career where you'd go in with really a blank slate and be able to design an entire curriculum exactly the way you wanted, with nobody saying, but we've always done it this way, and so forth. Well, part of the thing is they brought in for Leonard Silver and gave a little talk, you know. And he was one of the early systems people. So I was, I don't know, 25 then or something. I trotted myself up to the dean of the liberal arts school, and I said, what you ought to do is send me out to California so I can go to more training with this guy. And he said, okay. So Silver had a course that you could have gotten UCLA credit for it. I didn't do that. But it was 8 hours of instruction a day for a week. And before you went, you got sent this, literally a stack of books like this. And you were supposed to have read them all and done all of this stuff. And so like a good girl, I did all my homework and went out and sat there. And then, so you sat in class all day long, 8 hours a day. And then he would give you homework at night. About Wednesday, he says, well, have you been seeing Los Angeles? And I thought, so when did I have time to do that? He says, oh, I'll show you the city. And so I thought, well, I was going to see Hollywood or something. And what he showed me is he took me to UCLA, and I got to see the IBM 36090 computer, which was one of the early computers where you walked in, and it was a room bigger than this one. And it was all, the computers took up the whole room. And I thought, well.
Not Hollywood.
That wasn't no, I didn't get to go to Hollywood. But what Silver taught was systems analysis and introduced the whole idea of systems. And that was a different approach for me. And, but obviously is, very critical to design. And so I think I have to put him down as one of the people that sort of got me going in the right direction. But his work was phenomenal. He was quite a character, but Hynek knows him well, and so I think Silver was really an important person. Yeah, in terms of early thinking that sent you on the thing. So that was the systems part, and the analysis and the behavioral approach and stuff, originally came from Don Smith in another area. But that was, you think that the first Dick and Carey book came out in '78. So this was I had that first work from Silver in '68, I believe. So that was 10 years before you even had a textbook on that. So it was really scraping together a lot of, when you were trying to work with faculty and teach people how to put things together, some good materials came from the military.
Did Silver have some experience with the military, or was that?
He did work with military. He did industrial work. Was involved in corporate training, and had done a lot. But he taught us, in doing systems analysis, a different kind of flow charting. This was back when everybody had the IBM templates for the flow charts that would get your things on the arrows and the boxes and the, all of those different pieces. And he had a different flow charting language. But so it was a matter of, it was really a wonderful thing, because you went into either an existing thing, or you devised a new system by looking at the whole system and devising and thinking of the components and the subcomponents and the relationships between, and drew pictures of it. And it really helped the thinking process. I think when I was doing my early design work, is I would be talking with people. I would sort of in order to understand what they were seeing, I'd sit and flowchart. And then you could see where the holes were and what your questions had to be, and so forth.
It's almost like mind mapping today and how teachers use
Yeah,
mind mapping
yeah,
to
similar.
point out misconceptions. Your client could see where you were wrong and what you were doing. Excellent. Are there other pieces of history like that that you think people don't know today that they should, that come from?
Well, I think, I mean, one of the other pieces I haven't done that I keep saying I'm going to, I don't know if I will, is to write an intellectual history of the field, a history of the ideas, because I think a lot of that is lost. I mean, including when the field started, because if you lined up a bunch of people and say, when did the field start, or when did design start, they talk to you about World War II, you know, and give you the thing about the training in World War II and all of that. Well, if you go back into the early work, I mean, I could show you books where people were writing that based on World War I training materials. And they were really writing objectives. They were designing I mean, it was much the same thing. And when it came out of, and for much the same reason why they started in World War I, or II, they had done that in World War I. And it influenced a lot of the early curriculum thinking. It was really sort of a systematic approach, even though people weren't using that. But they were writing objectives. They were doing job analysis. They were, you know, it's really much longer, and I think that's missed. The you know, the roots go back a lot before 1941. But you know, and then when you look at academic programs, you know, there were really very few programs early on, and some of the very earliest programs, as you know, it's easier to tear a program apart than it is to build one. And you know, the USC program is gone. The program that Jim Finn was at Northern Colorado disappeared for a long time and then reemerged. So there's a Northern Colorado program now, but the Pittsburgh program has really been lost. You know, it's so programs change and they grow, but you know, I suppose that's part of the history. But I think that a lot of the important people, like, I don't know if people are still studying Edgar Dale.
Dale's kind of experience and
right.
Some of those things.
Now, incidentally, when I first met Edgar Dale was also a reading specialist. And there was the Dale-Chall readability formula. And that was my first introduction to Edgar Dale. And he says, oh, this man's done. So he was considered a giant in the reading field. He's a giant in all these other fields. Barb Seals, who I worked with on the definition book, was Edgar Dale's last graduate student.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, so she has some interesting Edgar Dale stories that are really something.
Are there others like Edgar Dale that have impacted your work?
Well, of course, he died, I think he died in '68, was Jim Finn. And he's really responsible for this organization, for AECT starting, and for setting up academic programs. And so I think we all owe a lot to Jim Finn. In terms of some of the ideas, you have to recognize Gagne. And I think the thing about Bob Gagne's work is that when you read his stuff, most of it seems, you know, you'd say, well, okay, right? You know, it's pretty straightforward, got that, and so forth. And I think the more you study it, the more you understand the complexity. And I know it wasn't, the first book I did, the 86 Theoretical and Conceptual Basis of Instructional Design, I remember distinctly writing this stuff on Gagne and going through this. And it's so true when you're writing, you know, you have to really, after I wrote that section, all of a sudden I thought, I think I really understand them now. I thought I did before. I thought I was a hot shot, but I didn't.
You know, I think that's very true, that he makes it simple, but it's so complex.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But that's the beauty of what he does.
Right.
Is that he is able to make it understandable to everyone else.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Tell us a little about your the books that you have written.
Well, the first one was this theoretical and conceptual basis of instructional design. And that started off, I was going to write a systems book. And wrote the systems chapter first, and then I said, no, this is just a piece of it. You know, need to do the other pieces too. And of course, that one is, people's first books are always interesting because nobody ever wants to publish the first one. Remember a rejection I got that said, well, you don't have a big enough name to write on this topic. Another one was, well, we're only publishing books that have the word computer in the topic, in the title.
Oh my goodness.
Well, who do you? So anyway, that was my first one. And what I was really trying to do with that was to come up with a structure of they were really taxonomies of the critical variables that impacted design. And what I wanted to do then, which I did, was collect data on all of those variables. Because there really was, you know, we had learning research, but there wasn't that much studying design. So this gets around to the next book. But I did a series of evaluations, is what I did for Ford Motor Company for their health and safety programs related to topics I didn't know diddly about, but you know. But I had structured the evaluation, so I was also collecting data on all these variables that I wanted. And that provided the basis for my second book, which probably is the least influential, but I thought it was good. And that was on a systemic approach to adult learning. And what I was really doing is presenting the data from all of those Ford studies and looking at adult learners. And part of my thing on that is, you know, everybody had always said, well, adult learning is very different from, you know, when children are learning, which partly there's some differences, but, you know, you really look at the data and learning is learning. And most of the key things are the same things going on. But, you know, like people say, oh, it has to be relevant to adults. And I'd say, if we talk to a 10-year-old, they'd say, why do I have to learn this? You know. So anyway, that was my second book, which was in 91, I think. And then shortly after that, I got involved with the definition and terminology work here at AECT, which came out with the book that I did with Barb Seals on that 94 definition.
What was the title of that one?
Definition and domains of instructional technology, the definition and domains of the field. Now, that sounds like it was a jump, but it really wasn't, because I really see the definition work as sort of establishing the theoretical boundaries of the field. So I think it's still saying, what's our practice base, what's our theory base, what's us and what's not us. So, and then shortly after that, I moved into the IPPY thing, worked on the design competency project, the Gagne book, and then the training manager competency projects, and those had books that came out of that. Where am I now? I'm trying to think if that goes up to the design and development. Well, you know, around in that time, the AECT started the handbooks, and Dave Jonathan asked me if, he says, would you be interested in writing a chapter on developmental research? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. And so I sat down and I said, I wonder what that is.
You had to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I said that term isn't commonly used. And so it was as much a matter of defining the concept as it was describing the research and giving examples of the research. So I've done several. One of the controversies with that is that some people, I know Bob Reeser was one, he says, I don't like that term developmental research. Why did you do that? And I said, well, because I was given it, you know. And so we've since really switched to design and development research, but it's sort of an evolution of the name. What happened, and various people would say it's very interesting, but no one says how do you do it. So that was the book that Jim Klein and I did, the design and development research, and it was really a methodology book on how you do it. Book that that came out in 2008 is the Instructional Design Knowledge Base that I did with Jim Klein and Monica Tracy, and that really started off and as sort of an update of that first book, Theoretical and Conceptual Bases. And, you know, said, oh, well, this won't be too hard. We're just going to be updating it. Well, you know, there's all sorts of new things you had to put in. And, you know, obviously it turned out to be a bigger project. What else is new? There are always bigger projects. And then the last piece that I've just turned in at the end of August, where I was editing, is the Definition and Terminology Committee has been finishing a project where we're concentrating not on definitions, but on the terminology piece. And so there's going to be an encyclopedia of terminology in the field.
Excellent.
That's coming out, and supposedly that should be out early next year. So.
That's excellent. That will be a big help to the field. It sounds like in a lot of ways that you have been sort of an analyzer and synthesizer for the field as a whole. Would you say that's an accurate portrayal?
I think a lot of the work has been, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I started off saying that's what I was going to do, but I think a lot of that has been, fits into that.
That's excellent. What are some of the most important trends in the field during your career, and where do you see things going now?
Well,
you mentioned systems.
Yeah, I mean, things sound, looking back now, they sound sort of obvious, but behaviorism was the big thing when I started, which obviously, you know, we've gone into cognitive and now constructive, and the whole systems notion, and of course technology. I mean, I can remember, when was this? Maybe early to mid-90s, one of the PIDT meetings when they were in Bloomington. Someone came in with the little demonstration of this brand new thing called the internet. And we sort of sat there amazed and looked at it. And I can remember the first time at a meeting someone came and demonstrated this word processing machine. Again, these make you sound very old. But so when you see what's happened to technology, you know, where I started saying, do I have to learn how to thread a film projector? And I think the difference was if somebody wanted to do instructional design today and said, you know, I'm not a techie, do I have to do that part? I think today the answer would be yes, you have to do some. You may not have to get into coding, or I don't know how you feel about that, but it's so integrated into not only as our tools, but how it affects the thinking and what you're doing. So I don't know how you do it devoid of having some understanding of the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's, and do you see any trends now that excite you as far, make you think, wow, well, just as an example, I remember when I first started years ago, individualized instruction, but it wasn't really individualized instruction. Do you think we're getting closer to that? Do you think, or are there other trends that you are excited by?
Well, I mean, the whole topic of individualized instruction is interesting. I did my dissertation around individualized instruction and around persistence and what keeps someone going, you know, which is still a issue right now in online learning, and how do you keep people going. And I can remember when you almost had to apologize if you were doing group instruction. You said, well, I know I really should be individualizing, but you know. And then it sort of went away from that, and now we really are moving back to various types of individualized instruction. See, that's sort of what I was talking about the development of ideas in the field, and see all of the manifestations of the development and growth and of some pretty basic ideas that I think are interesting. The whole thing on constructivism, which, you know, is sort of the politically correct thing to do. I don't know about. People are. There's one thing of talking about self-directed learning, individual development. Used to call it discovery learning. You know, some of those things. But whether you really, I mean, if you were a true constructivist, you wouldn't be giving objectives or goals or whatever you want to call them. And I think that we're emphasizing a lot of personal involvement in learning, which is important. But I don't know how much of it is true constructivism if you go back to the ideas, but that certainly has affected how instruction is being put together. I hope a trend is to put a lot more emphasis on getting databases and data-based rationales for some of the design work we do. Our work has been, much of it has been very much without a database. You know, there was the strategy selection parts had databases, but I did some work on validation of instructional design models. I remember talking to Walt Dick, and I said, well, you've got the longest model out. You know, if there's any validation data, has anybody ever done that with your model? And he said, no. He said they just try it and say, well, it works. And so that's it. But to really validate our models, or to have data saying that the same instructional design procedures are appropriate regardless of the content area or the age group or all, when we teach those things, these are the procedures and you can then take it and use it in all these different settings. We don't have any basis for saying that. I mean, we have a logical basis, but we don't have data for that. And I think some of the, what I call designer decision-making research, where people have been going in and a lot of it's qualitative, talking to people about how they design and what the rationale and what the thinking is and all of that. They're finding that classroom teachers do some different things, certainly than a corporate trainer.
Yes.
There may be some different models. Very generally, have some of the same principles, but I don't. I think that's the kind of thing that I think we need to be doing.
Is validating with that data.
Validating and coming up with data to support new models that are being built. More than just a logical, intuitive reasoning.
What do you think was the greatest accomplishment of your career, and why?
Oh, that's the hardest question on the list. I don't know. I suppose, I'll tell you, I completed over 100 doctoral students.
That's amazing.
So I suppose if, hopefully the things I've written have added something to the field. But I think the work with all of those people is probably now, I don't know, if you talk to all the 100, they'd see if what they learned from it, from me beating up on them. But,
well, you have a teacher's heart. That's wonderful. That's great. And let's see. And how would you like to be remembered within the profession?
I don't know. Hopefully not losing it. I'd like to. I suppose it would be nice to be remembered as someone who put some emphasis on data. That's a hard thing to do because the best data in the field comes from actual projects, which means you have to get into somebody else's work that may have proprietary implications with it. But I think that's the kind of thing, and it can be done. There are people that are willing to. You can make deals.
And then get that data is what
Sure.
you're saying, yes.
I mean, it's like when I did the evaluations with Ford Motor Company. I gave them evaluation reports. They're happy for that, and they say, do whatever you want with that data. So it can be done.
Well, thank you very much.